It's finally time to start deploying apps and services, and the first one is Certbot. So what is Certbot? Certbot is Electronic Frontier Foundation's tool for obtaining TLS certificates from Let's Encrypt and optionally auto-enabling HTTPS on your server. We will use Certbot to get a wildcard TLS certificate, but we'll ignore the auto-enable part because we will be using traffic. Let me explain that in more detail. What is all this TLS certificate stuff and how does it work? Let's say that you have some kind of server and that you've installed some HTTP server on it, e.g. Nginx or Apache. If someone wants to connect to your HTTP server over the internet using HTTPS protocol, you must have a valid TLS certificate. TLS certificates are based on trust. What that means is that you can create a TLS certificate yourself by typing in a few commands in the terminal, and you will get a completely valid TLS certificate which your HTTP server will be happy to serve to clients. But the issue is that the other side, who is using something like Chrome or Firefox, will not trust it. They will see that the certificate issuer is you and they don't know about you. They don't trust you. So the browser will alert them that something is fishy. For a long time, TLS certificates which are trusted by the web browsers could only be bought from a handful of companies. But then came Let's Encrypt. In order for you to get a TLS certificate from Let's Encrypt, all you have to do is to prove that you are the owner of the domain you are asking a TLS certificate for. And if you do prove it, Let's Encrypt will provide you a perfectly valid TLS certificate for free. The way you talk to Let's Encrypt is through a so-called ACME protocol, and you do that through an ACME client. In our case, that's Certbot. Now, we don't have Nginx or Apache installed directly on the server like this, but if we did, Certbot can figure that out and coordinate between your HTTP server and Let's Encrypt to prove that your HTTP server really can serve the domain you are asking a TLS certificate for. It does that by placing a file on your server that Let's Encrypt asked for, and if Let's Encrypt sees it, it will give you a certificate. All our HTTP servers will be inside either a Docker or Linux container, and they will be a part of some application. So, for example, both GitLab inside Docker and iRedMail inside a Linux container will both have its own Nginx, and CheckMK, also inside Docker, will have its own Apache HTTP server. In front, all of them will deploy traffic. I'll talk more about traffic later. For now, just think of it as an entry point for all HTTPS communications. Besides being a reverse proxy, it will also act as a TLS termination proxy. That means that the communication between the client and traffic will be HTTPS, but communication between traffic and any of the HTTP servers inside our private network will be HTTP. You could configure each of these HTTP servers to have TLS certificate too and make communication between them and traffic HTTPS, but if someone can snoop on communication which are inside your private network, and this is all inside a private network, you have a bigger problem. I usually don't bother with it. Traffic has ACME client built in. It can get all TLS certificates we need automatically, but more on that later. You might wonder, what do we need Certbot for then? I want to show you how to obtain wildcard certificate using Certbot and Linode DNS plugin. You can only get wildcard TLS certificate if you prove that you can manage DNS entries for that domain. Certbot will ask for a wildcard certificate. Let's Encrypt will ask Certbot to create a new TXT record with a long random string, and if it can, and Let's Encrypt confirms it, you will get your certificate. Then we'll use that wildcard certificate for non-HTTP stuff in our mail server in Postfix and Dovecot, but more on that later. Word of warning before we start. While I was doing this for the first time, destroying and redeploying my server over and over again, I've hit a Let's Encrypt's rate limit. If you have to do a lot of testing, you should use Let's Encrypt's staging environment, and only after you make sure that everything is working okay, switch back to the production environment. First thing we'll need is an API token in our Linode account. Go to the Linode website, click on your username and click API tokens. Click Create a Personal Access Token. I'll give it a label Certbot. I don't want it to expire. For permissions, give it read-write only for domains. That will allow it to manage DNS for your domains. And click Create Token. You should store this token in your password manager because Linode will not show it to you again. I've saved my token and now we can start configuring Certbot role. We again have main.yml in tasks directory. We now have a Certbot directory with credentials.ini where we stored our token and a getCerts script which will run Certbot with necessary parameters. And we have systemd certbot.timer and .service which will run this script periodically to renew our certificate. First, create necessary directories for this role, so it's certbot with subdirectories tasks, files, and certbot, not handlers this time. Then open main.yml in tasks subdirectory. This one is a bit longer, but there is nothing intimidating here. Using the community general pacman module, we will install certbot and certbot DNS Linode packages. We will then copy certbot subdirectory over to the server. This one contains credentials and our script for running certbot. Then we will copy certbot.service over to the etc systemd system directory on the server. And we will do the same thing with certbot.timer. Then we will make sure that the certbot.timer is started and enabled on boot. Remember that when you have a timer too, timer is the one you need to start and enable. It will trigger the service. You don't usually run the service directly in that case. And finally, we will run our script. Save the file and let's create credentials.ini in certbot subdirectory. This DNS Linode key is the API token you generated previously, and this DNS Linode version is something I got from the documentation of this plugin, so depending on when you are watching this, you might need to update that one. Save the file and open getcerts.sh also in certbot subdirectory. This script will run certbot with appropriate parameters. You should obviously use your own email here. We are using DNS Linode plugin with these credentials, and I couldn't get it to work without this DNS Linode propagation seconds parameter, but you may have more luck. And use your own domain here, so star.yourdomain for a wildcard certificate. This bottom part is not something I'll cover in this course, but I've left it as a bonus because I've struggled with it. You should check it out if you plan to have a mail server which will serve multiple domains. Save the file and let's open certbot.timer in files subdirectory. This timer will trigger a systemd service twice a day. Save this .timer and open .service, which looks like this. So it will just execute our script. Save .service file too. Let's edit setup.yml. I will add the certbot role and I will comment out the previous one to save the time. Save setup.yml and in virtual environment run Ansible playbook setup.yml. This one took quite a while because of the DNS Linode propagation seconds parameter we used in our script. We can go to the VPS now and check the contents of etc let's encrypt directory. More specifically, we are interested in this archive subdirectory. You will see your domain listed here. If you had multiple domains and used Certbot to get certificates for those too, they'd be listed in this directory. If we list the contents of this d-p.com directory, we can see the certificates for that domain. Now, when Certbot renews these certificates, it will place them in this same directory, but with this number incremented by 1. Because it is hard to reference something that constantly changes its name, Certbot also creates this live subdirectory. And if we list the contents of live.d-p.com, we can see that these are symbolic links to the latest file in archive subdirectory. So you usually want to reference these files here in live subdirectory, and you can be sure that they always point to the latest one. That's it for Certbot for now. We will use this wildcard certificate after we create a mail server.